Well, isn't that the definition of infinity? That somewhere, if there is really an infinity, there's not only a you and an I, but there's a you and an I and everybody else we've ever met, and all the exact events in the exact same order have gone down an infinite number of times, including this conversation.
Okay, except. There is, I don't know how many people know this, but often it's mind-blowing when you learn that some infinities are bigger than others. Joe Rogan just leaned 2 feet away from the microphone.
How does that?
Yeah, not all infinities are the same size.
But if it's infinity, then it's infinity. It's infinite. What is no?
Okay. Don't you remember when you were a kid? They said, "What's the biggest number you know?" 1,000,000. Well, there's 1,000,001.
Right.
Okay. How about a billion? Well, there's 1,000,000,001. The annoying kid always added 1 to it. Okay. How about infinity? Well, infinity and 1.
Right.
Okay. Well, it turns out infinity and 1 and infinity are the same number. Okay. So here's so for example, the number of counting numbers, so 1, 2, 3, up to infinity, okay?
Right.
The numbers you would use to count things, that's infinite. The number of irrational numbers, so the numbers that you cannot represent as a fraction, okay? There are more of those than there are counting numbers.
Whoa.
By far. So these are orders of infinity. Then there are more transcendental numbers than there are irrational numbers.
What's a transcendental number?
So that's a number that you'll never find as a solution to an algebraic equation. So pi is a transcendental number, e is a transcendental. These are magic numbers that show up in mathematics. And turns out there's like an even bigger infinity of those than there is of these other 2 classes of numbers. And they use the Hebrew letter aleph in ranking. So it's aleph 1, aleph 2, aleph 3, aleph 4. I think there are 5 levels of infinity. So my point is, just because there's infinite universes, to me, doesn't mean there's infinite conversations that have happened. And I'd want to really explore the depths of infinities before I say and agree with you that this conversation has happened an infinite number of times in just this way, except you have a different engineer sitting next to us, and
an infinite number of times where it's been Jamie too, right?
Yeah, in principle, that's the argument that's given. But I think that there's some nested infinities in there that deserve some explanation.
My feeble brain is not handling this well. What are your thoughts on alien life? On life outside of this planet? Is this something you think about?
Yeah, I think there must be. Even in the solar system, I would not be surprised if we find microbes on Mars or on some of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn where there's liquid water.
Like Europa.
Yeah. And the reason is, if you think about, the reason I think that, and it's a guess, is because if you look at the history of life on Earth, then so Earth formed, and it was just there was no life. It was a ball of rock. And almost as soon as it cooled down, we see evidence of life. So certainly 3.8 billion years ago, possibly even further back than that, we see evidence of life on Earth. So somewhere along the line, geochemistry, active geochemistry became biochemistry on Earth. And we have some idea, that if you get gradients of temperature and acid and alkaline and the conditions that are naturally present on the surface of oceans, then complex carbon chemistry spontaneously happens. So we know that life, almost certainly we know that life began on Earth. I mean, the other option is it came from space or something like that, but it probably didn't, right? It probably began on Earth. So that means that at least here, that happened. And that we know that the conditions that led to the origin of life on Earth were present on Mars 4 billion years ago. And we know that they're present on Europa today. So I don't see that there's anything special. Life is just chemistry. And the idea that geochemistry becomes biochemistry is not fanciful because it happened here. So I think that given the same conditions, it would be surprising to me if the same thing didn't happen, in that life begins. So that's one of the, to test that is one of the great frontiers of science now. It's one of the great challenges, which is why another reason we're interested in Mars, because we know those conditions were there. We know there were what's called hydrothermal vent systems on the floors of oceans on Mars 3.8 or 4 billion years ago. So it would be good to know if what I've said is right. And the way we find out is to find life or evidence of past life.
Example, you've heard this. We only use 10% of our brain.
Yeah, but that's not real.
There's an entire movie based on that premise.
Lucy. Yeah.
Okay? That premise is false. It was never true. That's another kind of thing. It was never true.
Yeah, that annoyed me. I liked that movie though.
Yeah, it was fun. It was good seeing Scarlett in that. So and Morgan Freeman's in it. It's had some good roles. So let's go back to where it started from. You know where that came from? There was a neuroscientist, well, a brain scientist, who, because you can't do experiments on human brains, that's not ethical, and all right. All you can do is wait till someone gets an accident, and so there's a nail gun that damages this part of the brain. Oh, you lost your language. Damage of this part. Oh, you lost your short-term memory. Oh, you lost your long-term memory. And so you assemble the bits of what the brain is doing by people who were injured. This is a very slow, clumsy process, but that's all you got. The person who had an article, said, the brain is so complex. Today, we only know what 10% of it is used for.
And that got...
Overnight, that became we only use 10% of our brain. And that became the mantra of school teachers getting children to rise to their potential. And there was no force operating against that coming into our culture.
It wouldn't have ruined the movie if they didn't have that in there. I mean, there's no reason for that to be in the movie. The movie was fascinating as it was.
They could have just given her some other power, but they went with that 10% thing.
Yeah, but even they didn't even need to do that.
Okay, can I give my critique even of that? Let's say we did only use 10% of our brain.
Okay.
Here's my critique. Even if that were true.
Okay.
The smartest people you know, do they have an inkling of kinetic powers over objects in front of them? Why are we obsessed with extremely high intelligence having power over matter? Why aren't people with extremely high intelligence just good at solving problems? They're just the best people at solving problems in the world.
We want superpowers.
Speaking of debris, there was this asteroid that collided with Earth over Chelyabinsk in the Soviet Union, in Russia, just near the Siberia, in the Ural Mountains, just on the coast of Siberia, on the border of Siberia. That was visible to everybody in broad daylight, and you had to avert your eyes when it happened. And they felt a shockwave, and the shockwave broke windows and sent 600 people, nearly 1,000 people to the hospital. What happened? Well, because they saw the light, and they got up from their table and went to the window to see what had happened, there's a time delay between the shockwave and the light, because light travels fast and sound travels slow. So they'll go to the windows, and the shockwave hits, and it blasts broken glass into their face. So it was a big Band-Aid collision that we had.
Wow.
The injured people all needed basically Band-Aids. Okay, no one died, but nearly 1,000 people were injured. So at an auction, by the way, that actually exploded and pieces of it were recovered. At an auction, I purchased a piece of that meteorite, but you know what else I purchased? Some of the shards of glass that the shockwave had broken.
There was a group of scientists that were speculating that it's possible that octopi had come from somewhere else. Some frozen eggs had actually come from somewhere else and landed on Earth. And these were legitimate scientists who were contemplating, not morons.
I mean, for example, you might have seen the other day we found an Earth rock on the moon.
Yes.
Right, well, it's back on Earth now because the Apollo
Right.
astronauts brought it back, didn't they? It's 4 billion years old or something like that.
One of the oldest rocks ever found.
Yeah.
Right.
So we know that material gets transferred between planets. And so it's not inconceivable that microbes could survive that journey. Right? We know that microbes can survive in space, for example. So that isn't mad. It's probably unlikely, but it's not mad. But with the octopus, I hadn't heard that. But the thing is that the octopus is still extremely similar biologically to us. I mean, the differences are negligible.
Yeah.
So it's still got the same energy system with this thing called ATP and DNA and all that stuff. It's all very, very similar.